Hey everybody, it's me, Robert Phoenix, and I am here for Sunday night AstroLive. And I apologize for being late tonight. Just in general, I mean, I've had a bit of a rough day physically. I'm just kind of letting you know. So I've been in recovery mode, and I've been trying to kind of save up enough juice to put together a reasonable show this evening. So I had to put it off as far as I could and try to rally the troops here a little bit. So thank you for your patience. I truly appreciate it for people that are hanging out and waiting for the show. And I know it's an hour later than normal. So tonight we are going to get into the David Wilcock story. And a lot of it will have to do with astrology and looking at David's chart and kind of who he was astrologically, and also some of the conditions of his life and subsequent death that are related to his chart. That said, it will not solely be about his charts, even though we will talk a great deal about his chart, but it will also be about the culture in general and at large, because I feel like that's a really important part of the story that needs to be told. Let me just do this, get the green screen out of here. Oh, hey, no. Then how about blur? We'll blur the background. So that's going to be, so it's in the title of the show, right? It is the death of the Piscean savior syndrome. And I'll go deeper into that as we sort of untangle these things. I don't want to give it all away at the beginning. But another little tidbit that we're going to get into tonight is the emergence of Uranus and Gemini, which I did not put into the title of the show. But there are some very interesting and right out of the gate, some troubling effects of Uranus and Gemini, which I'm going to get into as well. Not to say that it will all be bad, by the way. It will no doubt be interesting, but we're going to be talking about something of immediate import that bears paying attention to, and it really shifts. It's symbolic of a shift from the physical world, right, which was Taurus, into a more non-physical world, or a world where things are augmented beyond the physical. Let's put it that way, with Gemini, and the kind of the replication process, as it were, of something that exists in one form, but now may exist in a slightly different form, in one that is clearly more ominous and threatening. So, I like to leave you with good vibes here on a Sunday night. That's always like right at the top of my list. So if you're new to the show, welcome. Sometimes I don't do a good enough job of welcoming the new folks that see a JPEG and well, let me check this out, right? Who's this guy? What is he all about? And I still run into people that are still finding the show after all these years. And in case you're wondering who I am, I'm Robert Phoenix, and I am an astrologer mostly by trade. That's what I do. I also do social commentary on a lot of different things. Some of it is astrologically related, or I can relate it back to astrology in most cases, because It's amazing what astrology will show us. And I do personal readings for people, and I do coaching. I love coaching with people. And I'm about to have my first book published here shortly, thanks to Jamie and Bruce down in Panama and Costa Rica, respectively. And it's going to be an astrology book based on my course. And it's going to be, 350 pages, 23 chapters. And I think it's going to be one of those books where if somebody says, can you recommend a book on astrology so I can get started? It's going to be this book. And I don't mean to sound, arrogant or over the top, but I'm telling you, it's going to be this book, because that's the feedback I'm getting, right? When people read it, they're like, oh my God, your course just comes alive in your voice. And when you read something, it's a different experience than actually watching a video. So we're hoping here that the next month or so, as soon as I get my act together, get some pictures that I actually like. I have a challenging time taking pictures I actually like about myself. I'm not sure what that says about my vanity, but once that's done and we make a few edits, off it will go, and you'll be able to buy a hard copy through Amazon, or I believe there might be a digital reader as well. I will urge you to buy the hard copy though, because it's going to be a really nice book. And Bruce has selected a great bond of paper and a great typeface, and the publishing process that he uses is the same one that was, I believe, developed by CERN over in Switzerland for them to publish their documents. So I'm really excited about everything that's happened so far, and just keep your eyes and ears open, and we're close. We're real close. So anyway, that's who I am. I've been doing this professionally now, in a professional capacity since 2009. So what are we going on? That's 17 years. 17 years I've been writing about astrology, podcasting about astrology, streaming about astrology. I'm pretty sure that I was one of the first wave of podcasters. And I mean podcast. We're not talking YouTube. We're talking Blog Talk Radio. I think Ann Ortley was on Blog Talk Radio as well, if I'm not mistaken. And there was a whole group of what I would call the Black community of astrologers from Facebook who were streaming on Blog Talk. And I became really good friends with a lot of those folks, and we'd be on each other's show. And it was really exciting, getting their take on astrology. Not, look, astrology is astrology, right? But, there was at times a bit of a different take, because they're coming from a different cultural place, right? How could it not be different? And so sometimes we would collaborate, and I'd be on their show and they'd be on my show. And it was really cool. We learned from each other. I really miss that, right? And in 2013, I started to co-produce and curate, I guess, and was the host of 24 episodes on Gaia TV called The 11th House, hence the name of this YouTube channel. And I'm going to be referencing some of that tonight, because part of the David story dovetails with my time at Gaia, even though I never met David. And I did 24 shows there. but he was everywhere, right? Like he had permeated the entire building, right? He permeated the entire space. And David was their cash cow, right? And with Moon and Taurus, I think it's an appropriate metaphor for David's relationship with Gaia. He was their cash cow. He built Gaia TV because he was so popular. And Regina had a really popular show as well. And Regina, if you don't know the sort of the backstory of Gaia, there wouldn't be a Gaia TV without Regina, because Regina basically had her own company that was kind of Gaia-like with interviews, and Gaia bought Regina's platform, right? And not only did they buy her platform, but they brought her in-house so she could continue to do what she was doing. So Regina was a real pioneer in this whole space, and she obviously has interviewed, like if you're in the spiritual space, there's a good chance Regina's interviewed you, right? So I went out there in 2013, and I did my first show with Regina, but my connection with Gaia started with Jay Widener. And I had found Jay Widener as I just started podcasting, and I'd run across his Stanley Kubrick breakdown, or his breakdown of Stanley Kubrick in The Shining. And when I saw it, I was like fucking blown away. I'm like, this is really great. I got to get this guy on my show. And I didn't know Jay at the time. So I reached out to him, and he emailed me back, and we sat down and we recorded my second or third podcast. And it was about mostly The Shining, although we did talk about Eyes Wide Shut. And so we clicked. Jay and I had really good chemistry, and I decided to have him on again not long after that. So I've told this story before, but if you're new here, I'll share it with you again, or I'll share it with you. But some of you have heard this. Jay and I were scheduled to do this podcast, and it was, I think, like a Thursday night or something like that. And so back then, a lot of the podcasts that I would do, sometimes people would call it and do it live. Other times I would record them and then I would play it on Blog Talk. And that was the case with this show with Jay. So he shows up, we do the show. And I think a lot of it had to do with Christopher Nolan and Batman, The Dark Knight Rises. I think we talked a little bit more about Kubrick. And that night, Jay was actually he hadn't seen the movie yet, or maybe he had seen it after we did the podcast. That's right. He had seen it after we did the podcast. But the night that we did the podcast, he was supposed to go see the movie in Aurora, Colorado. And he was scheduled to go to the showing where James Lee Holmes supposedly showed up and shot up the theater, right? Like it was a string of these very strange kind of lone gunman shootings that seemed to be quite popular during the Obama era. Let's just put it that way. And so by doing the podcast with me, Jay avoided a date with perhaps a darker destiny, right? So Jay and I we're strangely connected because of this podcast. So I want to just, before we end tonight, I want to give a shout out to a friend, and she's going through a pretty difficult time with her health. And so I want to bring up her GoFundMe. And so I'm going to talk about her a little bit now. but then I'll talk about her GoFundMe later. So a friend of mine, Mary Elizabeth, who is a publicist, went to Gaia one day because she had a client who was at that time doing a lot of stuff with George Norrie. She'd been on Coast to Coast AM, and then George, of course, still has a show at Gaia, and I think it's called Beyond Reality or something like that. So she was on George's show, and when she was there, she actually mentioned my name to Jay, and she said, "You should have Robert Phoenix on your network." And Jay said, "Oh yeah, I know Robert. I know Robert." So that it began a discussion. And originally, Jay was interested in hiring me to work at Gaia, which I've never shared, right? Like he was willing to hire me. He said, "Are you willing to move to Boulder and be a part of?" He wanted me to be on the production side of Gaia, and my son I was living in Austin, and my son was here, and I really couldn't do that, right? So I said, "No, it sounds really cool. It sounds like a cool job, but I can't do this." Okay, well, we'll bring you in, and we'll do a show with you and Regina, and we'll see how that goes. So I did this show with Regina, and we really totally clicked. And the thing that was really interesting about that show, well, there were two things that were interesting about that show and my time with Regina. And I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. So whenever somebody comes to Boulder, because Regina's still doing her show, she meets that person ahead of time so that she can get a sense of them and, kind of get the vibe and everything and talk about what they're going to talk about. So she does that with me, and we meet at this cafe. It might have been Snooze or something like that for breakfast. So I go there. I immediately like Regina. Like I know I'm going to like her. You get into somebody's field and you can feel it, right? Like I like this person. They like me. Click, click, right? So we're sitting down, we're talking, we're just talking about all this stuff, right? And I said, "So like what are your coordinates?" She says, "Coordinates." So yeah, like what's your sign? What's your rising sign? Oh, look who's here tonight. We got a Jasper sighting here tonight. Jasper, you want to say hi to people? You want to say hi to people instead of wrecking my computer? I think that's what you want. There he is, the astrological cat. Right here. Say hi to everybody. Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're a good boy, huh? Okay. He's going to get my attention somehow. So I said, "So, okay, what are you?" So, well, I'm a Scorpio with Taurus rising. And so I'm doing the math in my head, right? I'm like, "Oh, she's going to have Saturn come into her seventh house." I'm like, that's always interesting when it comes to relationships, right? And if you're in a relationship and Saturn shows up, it's a bit of a test of the relationship. And if people are on the same page, it's fine, right? It's like, we're good, we can move forward, right? If you're not on the same page, Saturn will take you apart, right? And if you're single when Saturn goes into your seventh house, don't think it's not going to be good for relationships. It's one of the best transits for relationships because you will find the one. Okay. You'll find the one. Get your tail out of there. So I'm talking to Regina about this, and I said, this is a very interesting time for you with relationships. I mean, you're gonna have to kind of sort out, what's really important in your relationships. And as soon as I say that, her husband walks through the front door of the cafe, right? And this is the guy who helped her build her network. And as soon as he walked in the door, the weirdest thing happened. Regina and I looked at each other, and we knew in that moment exactly what I was talking about. And it was right on the money with the entrance of her husband. Like I had just finished the fucking sentence, right? And we both knew. I think his name was Scott. So that was a trippy moment. I mean, it was really trippy because I'm trying to tell her, like, look, you're going to have stuff come up in relationship and you're going to have to figure out, like, you know, what if you are in agreement with where you're going. So long story short, I don't want to get into too many sordid details here, but Scott goes away for an extended stay in, I think, Thailand or someplace like that. And let's just say he wanted to alter the agreement of their marriage. Hello, Saturn in the seventh house, right? And Regina's like, no can do. I can't go for that. Oh no, no can do. If you know the famous Hall & Oates song, you kind of know what I'm talking about. So that was it, right? Like, I mean, it was, if I needed to prove that I was a legitimate astrologer, all Regina had to do was wait a couple months and it all played out. And I guess she married somebody else, and I know she did, and I'm not sure where that went. But so then I do this interview with her, right? And it's like we're just cooking because Regina and I, the one thing I'll say about Regina, we had amazing chemistry. You know, we really had really good give and take. And to this day, I really still like Regina and respect all the work she's done. I mean, sort of ideologically, we sort of began to, you know, part ways. So I do the show with her, right? And it is just like totally on. And I get to this one part where I don't know how I got there, but I was talking about this movie, The Parallax View, with Warren Beatty. And I was talking about it in terms of like social programming, social engineering, and you know, MK Ultra, because there's a very evident undercurrent in that movie about that. Like there's a scene where Warren Beatty he's a journalist and he infiltrates this top secret company and he goes through kind of a Clockwork Orange kind of experience, and it's all on the scene, it's all on the screen. And man, I mean, that scene will fuck with your head, right? Really fuck with your head. And Alan Pakula was the director, was part of the Paranoia trilogy. Anyway, so I'm describing the scene, and I'm doing more than just describing the scene. Like I'm describing it, and I'm like extrapolating on it, and I'm like, I'm in the zone. Like I'm really in the zone. I'm like, fuck. In my head, you know, like you have this thing in your head that watches what you're doing for just a brief period of time. And in this part of my head, I'm like, I'm fucking killing this right now, right? And then we do the show, and I'm like, wow, that was great chemistry. You know, I was able to extrapolate on this movie, bring it back, right? And then we get this voice from the call room. We have a bit of a problem. And it's like, well, what's the problem? The guy operating the board, whom I had met, and he was a little fairy dusty. Let's just I liked him. Don't get me wrong. I liked him. He's a Gemini. I still liked him. No, I love Geminis. Anyway, he forgot to fucking press record. The whole show, none of it was recorded. And I'm like, oh shit. How am I ever going to recreate that parallax view thing? Like I fucking can't, because it won't come out the same. So I said, okay, if I get there in the show, I'll try it again. And I can't let these people know how pissed off I am right now, right? Like and Regina was just apologetic. I mean, don't worry about it. Let's just get it done. And, you know, we got it done. We had and she says, wow, that was really, really good. I don't know. It might've been better than the first one. I said, I think it might've been too, right? So, you know, you get tested in life in those moments. like, how are you going to respond? You know, if I responded like a dick, right, and they would have said, you know, interesting guy, but you know, we don't want this around here. But what are you going to do? You know, you just sort of like, you know, put on your big boy boots or big girl boots, keep going. So then that led to me getting a show on Gaia, and I was there for 24 episodes. So I have a little insight into the sort of the company and kind of the vibe. Okay. I'm also, I wasn't there when the whole Corey thing went down. I was long gone by that point. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But I'm going to talk about some other things. I'm just giving you a background of sort of my experience there. And again, if you're new to the show, you probably didn't, and some of you may not even know that I've got 24 episodes on Gaia TV. In fact, you do a search on my name, it shows up in Gaia. All right. So I was having a great conversation with Ferris a couple of weeks ago. And Ferris said to me, because I used to do prayers on this show before we started. And he says, man, I really used to love it when you used to do these prayers out by the tree and stuff when you were streaming. Why did you stop? And there was a point in time where I don't know. I think I stopped because I was, let's just put it this way. I don't mind being a bit profane. Okay. So I was sort of testing, the sacred versus the profane. And can we have both? I say yes. Right. So at the risk of being hypocritical, what we're going to do is we're going to say a little bit of a prayer here tonight to open the show. And I am actually going to include David Wilcock in this prayer. And I will preface this, and I'm just being 100% honest. I was not the biggest fan of David Wilcock. Okay. I have my own reasons. I wasn't the biggest fan. That said, I really, really hope that his journey in the afterlife is reconciled, because his journey in this lifetime was not. And as much as I may not have agreed with it wasn't really David per se, although there were things about David that I did disagree with. It was more of the spectacle around David that I disagreed with, which I'll talk about as we go through this. But why don't we do a little bit of a prayer here and just, first of all, invoke and I like to use Father, Mother, God, because that creation is both, right? And you'll get blowback from Christians. Oh, Father, Mother, like God is the Father. No, God is both, right? God is the Father and the Mother. The force of creation of the universe, whatever you want to call it, right? It is masculine and it's feminine. We can't have one without the other. Is the father the head of the household? Well, I'll let you decide on that one with your own personal hierarchy, right? So I will use the phrase Father, Mother, God, okay? Just letting you know. All right, so here we go. Father, Mother, God, dear Father, Mother, God, in the spirit of love, in the highest intent, in consciousness for all beings who are watching this, and those who are not, but whose ears are attuned to the best of their ability to the pulse of the cosmos and the everlasting love that is this creation. We welcome you into this transmission consciously and aware of the fact that you are in all and through all, that you are one and we are one with you. And as we do so, we humbly ask for blessings and resolution, clarity, truth, courage, and humor as operating principles through this transmission. And we say a prayer for our brother David, who many people have grieved over his loss and has left a significant hole in their lives, and often wondering and questioning why such a thing would happen. And we pray for those people as well, and hope that they can gain some clarity and insight, not only into David's passing, but their own relationship with it. And so, as a result of this, Father, Mother, God, I pray for David's soul, and that it is somewhere in eternity, and in a place ultimately of peace, because it seemed as though at the end it eluded him, and it eluded him like we elude ourselves sometimes. So anyway, prayers for you, David, wherever you are, and we hope that your soul is reconciled. That's the prayer. Okay, so why don't we start the show? All right. First of all, let me talk a little bit about, let me bring his chart up. And we'll do that. We'll bring the chart up, and we'll start to get into the chart part, right? The chart part of David Wilcock. Let me do this here. I gotta get the right one. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to bring up two charts. The first one will be his natal chart. Okay. And then the second chart will be the chart that has the transits of his passing, which took place at 11:05 on April 20th. Okay. So we're going to look at both of these charts. And the April 20th chart is quite telling. All right. Before I do that, I do have to have one piece of business here, because there's a lot of you here, and I have to talk about Silver Botanicals, because Silver Botanicals is one of our partners, along with True Hemp Science. And Silver Botanicals has a great, and I mean absolutely great, promotion that they're sharing with us right now. And it is the Shine and Dime bundle. And I just got to get this in before we dive into David. And what these toothpastes offer are something you won't find in other toothpastes. Here's what you're going to get. It's 100% natural, 20 parts per million, 99.999% nano silver, and it's made with nano hydroxy apatite, made with pure essential oils, fluoride free, SLS free, travel friendly, easy to dispense, airless pump. It also has diatomaceous earth, some essential oils, calcium carbonate. And what it does is it helps remineralize your teeth. That's right, remineralizes your teeth. And they have 3 flavors: the orange chill, the cool mint, and I have no picture of the toothpaste. All right, sorry about that. Let's try this again. The StreamYard always does this. I always have to do it twice. That should work. Let me just check. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So they've got the orange chill, the cool mint, and then the star anise. They're all really delicious. And when you do the special, you get all 3 of them. That is a 3-month supply, by the way, of toothpaste. you get the 32-ounce bottle of Silver Tongue Oral Care, which is their mouth rinse. And those are all the essential oils pictured. And then you get an uncirculated silver dime, which is pretty cool, right? They make great little gifts. If you have a grandkid and you want to talk about real money, there you go. Get them a silver dime. So you get all of this for $76. That includes free shipping, and shipping is going up. And if you've got a 32-ounce bottle of the Silver Tongue Oral Care, yeah, you know, it's you're getting it's part of the deal, right? So it's not part of this deal. It's separate. It's $76.09. So you're getting a nice little discount plus free shipping. And people that have tried the toothpaste absolutely love it. So Silver Botanicals, there's a link in the description of the show. And these guys are right here, San Marcos, Texas. Basically, it's a two-man operation with some help interspersed every now and then. And they are doing amazing, amazing work. And they're using technology at a scale that allows them to produce products in a really, really economical and when I say small, I'm really talking about like the staff. So cutting edge, it's cutting edge capitalism, economics, and cutting edge science using nano silver. All right. So let's bring David's chart back up here. We'll do that. And then let's dive in. All right. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so David Wilcock was born March 8th, which is also known as International Women's Day. I do not find it ironic that most of David's avid fans and followers happen to be women. And he was born on International Women's Day, which is, by the way, a communist holiday. But just letting you know, it's also the birthday of my son. He's born March 8th. And he doesn't like that he was born on International Women's Day. Although I do think his mother takes great pride in that. It's also the birthday of Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees, my favorite monkey, Mickey Dolenz, March 8th. So let's get into David's chart a little bit. He's a Scorpio rising. And the thing about people with Scorpio rising, and even though David had those, you know, those Piscean blue eyes, right? People who have Scorpio rising can sometimes have very penetrating stares. You know, like when I was young, I had a stare that could probably drop you at 40 feet. I'm just being honest, right? As you get older, you kind of lose that laser, you know, young man's rage edge, right? But this is what you'll see with Scorpio rising people. They've got a look about them, right? But David wasn't your typical Scorpio rising. And this is where things get really interesting, and I think it is the most archetypal expression of his chart. And he has Neptune in the first house, and it's exalted. It's in Sagittarius, right? Neptune in Sagittarius, that's a high vibration. So David is kind of naturally hooked up to that, right? He's naturally hooked up to this kind of high vibration, and it is the ruling planet of his sign as well. And there are some interesting elements to Neptune on the ascendant, some of which can be very distorting, right? And if you have Neptune on the ascendant, you feel free to chime in here. But there are times where people who have Neptune on the ascendant, and from the outside, people will look at them and go, oh my God, she's got the most perfect life. She's got a great husband. And oh man, she lives in Aspen, Colorado, and everything about her is just, just great, right? Just absolutely, they take all of the best attributes of that person and then they project onto them because that's what they want, right? That's what they want to see. They see the best attributes of that person that reflect back to them. And so they're identifying with that person in their own way, right? This is typical of Neptune on the ascendant or in the first house. But then what'll happen is that those same people can turn on the person, right? And it's like, okay, well, your shit didn't stink. Now it really stinks. And we're going to take you down, right? And that's Neptune as being the scapegoat. And now you become the scapegoat for these other people in your life. And again, the wonderful things that they attributed to you, which may have been true or may have been an exaggeration of the truth, right? There's that. And then there's the negative side of it where they want to tear you down. And that may not really be the truth either, right? It would be a projection of whatever that person was experiencing, feeling, and putting it onto the person with Neptune in the first house. So it can be great and beautiful and extremely out of touch, right? Or it can be like desecrating and dark and what's the word I'm looking for? Just dangerous, right? When people start to character assassinate, it's dangerous. It can be either way. And in many cases, neither of those things are really completely true, right? They may be true to some degree, but Neptune has this tendency to distort. Okay. It's the nature of Neptune. On the ascendant, it acts as a mirror and it puts the mirror up to the rest of the world. Now, from the personal standpoint, right? The personal standpoint, the individual may identify with Neptune in a way that is influenced by how people are perceiving and projecting onto their Neptune. So in the case of David, when he was at the height of his, by the way, I'm working on a longer form version of this over on Substack, and I've actually published the first part. I didn't put a link here, but I talk about this to some extent. I'll talk about it more. But David was somebody who was given the rock star treatment, right? David was a spiritual rock star. And there were kind of a number of these people that were floating around at this time. And David might have been like one of the most popular ones. Another guy who was also kind of in this realm, but perhaps in a different circle, was Nassim Harriman. And Nassim is actually a really brilliant guy, right? And he's cool and down to earth, but he was another one of these guys at that time that was sort of this sort of spiritual, metaphysical rock star. Like he would go to these events and he was a big speaker every year at Earth Dance. And Nassim was more like Burning Man. He was like a Burning Man kind of guy, Earth Dance, but brilliant. Really, he was on Art Bell. I think he was. I know he was on Coast to Coast with Nori. David Wolf emerges out of this time, right? He's another one of these guys that sort of takes on the role of being like a spiritual rock star. And I lived in Marin County, not Marin County. I lived in Alameda County in Point Richmond, right at the edge of it and just across from Marin County. And so every now and then I'd venture over there for parties, these sort of Marin New Age reggae parties and shit like that. Some of them were quite nice. Hired vans and everything because the guy who was throwing the party was a big weed dealer and he had a band. And so he was also considered to be very spiritual. So, hey, let's have a big party. Let's rent some vans and bring some people out. And that was actually my first introduction to David Wolf. He was at this party. And again, I mean, treated like royalty. These people, places like Marin and Maui and Malibu, the 3Ms, right? They had the backstage pass to everything, right? Backstage pass to everything. So I'm just trying to give you and I actually had lunch one time during this period with David Wolf, and it was at this vegan restaurant, and I actually liked him. When I got to sit down with David Wolf and talk with him, really engaging guy, I really liked him, right? And so this image that he was kind of portraying at this party, I think David's a Leo too, by the way. And the guy that I was sitting down with and having lunch with, I wouldn't say they were dissimilar, but I had a much better sense as to who he was over lunch. The reason I'm bringing him up, though, is because, and I'm almost certain this is fact, because I was friends with Richard Grossinger, who published both David Wolf and David Wilcock's first book. And I think that guy, Win Free, who co-wrote that book, I think he died recently, which is weird, right? But as and Richard did these, he would often do this. He would travel somewhere and he would blog post his travels. And they were often quite interesting, sometimes a little, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? I wouldn't say off kilter, but sometimes Richard would get into a bit of over elaboration on certain things. But by and large, he was a really astute critic. Richard was a Scorpio. So he was a really astute critic and a great eye and a passion for capturing these moments. And there were a series of posts from Kauai in Hawaii, and he was staying at this farm thing that David Wolf and David Wilcock had purchased together. I don't know whatever happened to it, but their whole idea was to grow these exotic trees and exotic fruits and somehow turn them into products, right? That was their goal together with this thing. And so David Wilcock shows up in this, I guess you'd call it travel log. And Richard has this conversation with David. And it's a very kind of important conversation because he is David's publisher. And it has come to his attention that the book that Richard published, David barely wrote it, right? And yet his name was, and again, I'm not saying this because David would go on to write other books with his name attached, and he wrote those books. But this one he did not. And in this travel log, he got David to admit that he did not write the book. And I believe subsequent pressings of that book included the name Winfrey, if I'm not mistaken. Right. But I clearly remember this travel log of Richard in Hawaii, right, where he corners David, and David says, "Yeah, I didn't write the book." And I thought that was really interesting, that he would allow that for such a long period of time, because I think I was reading this in like 2016 or something like that, and he had written that book, I don't know, 3 or 4 years prior, and moved on to different publishers. So I just thought, wow, like, why wouldn't you just say co-written by Winfrey? Or I felt it was odd, right? And it honestly, it didn't sit well with me. People always send me things like, "Oh, you got to watch this guy. You got to watch this guy." And 9 times out of 10, I don't. And the reason I don't, and it's all very well meaning, but the reason I don't is because I don't want other people's ideas coming into my brain. Like, I don't want to inadvertently like pick up an idea that I'd read somewhere else. I don't think it's fair to that person, and it's not fair to my process. And I'm not the only one that's in this space that just stays in their lane. You'll find that Emily is like that as well. So, but Richard sent me, it was his blog. So okay, I'll read it. But why am I talking about this in this way? Because it's Neptune in the first house, right? There was a level of deception that Richard had to confront David with. And then David said, "Okay, yeah, you're right. I didn't." It's like, okay, well, there you go. But it wasn't that. It was, again, it was like the way that Richard talked about like their little farm collective in Hawaii. It was like they were living in, I don't know, some sort of Xanadu, right? I mean, these people, David and David, were making money, right? They were making money from being singular characters in the sort of rock star post New Age movement, right? Like a lot of the older people who had been associated with the New Age movement had sort of, like aged out. Like Brad Steiger, who wrote about everything, was like aging out, right? And so there was this new wave of younger people that were coming along. And of course, David had this great story about being the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, which in some ways is compelling, but also the Cayce Foundation never recognized it. So who knows? Who knows what's behind that story, right? But that's part of David's creation myth. Like, he comes right out of the gate and says, "I am the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce." Like, that's clout, right? And then there's some things where it's like, oh yeah, I can see the resemblance, and there's this and this synchronicity, and it starts him off in a way that other people don't have like a stepping stool to use. I'm going to get into some of the super soldier stuff a bit tonight. And like a lot of the super soldier, like if you were a super soldier in the mid 2000s, like you were a hot property. You were on that show Bases with that guy Miles. Was it Miles Johnson? I think, for his last name. But this is where Max Spear shows up, and James Rank shows up, and eventually Corey Good emerges out of this super soldier world. And I remember that if you James Casbolt was another one, And that if you were a super soldier, again, it gave you kind of this status. Like you had this clout. Oh, super soldier must have, secret powers or superpowers. And oh my God, they went through all that Illuminati torture, and oh, they might have time traveled, and and most of it was not provable. And I'm not saying that this didn't happen, like, but what was really interesting is astrologically, all this stuff was coming out about the super soldiers when Uranus was in Aries, like for 7 years, right? From 2011 to like 2018, right? That's the Uranus and Aries run, right? And that's when the whole super soldier thing really explodes. And Aries is the soldier, right? And Uranus is way the fuck out there. So I love the astrology around this stuff. It's like, okay, I guess we're gonna spend time talking about super soldiers now for the next 7 years, and go down that Area 51 or that Dulce, New Mexico rabbit hole, right? So I'm just giving you a sense as to like how people would acquire spiritual clout and sort of launch themselves. And it always helps when there's a mythos, right? Whether you're a super soldier or the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, like it helps. It drives the narrative. So again, that's part of David, right? Like that's his thing. And the vibe that was portrayed in Richard's travelogue was, again, that this was a group of people that were living a very different reality than most other people, right? They had, I wouldn't say they had fuck you money, but they had pretty good money, right? And they had an in status with their group, so they could show up at places and immediately, like, the red carpet would be rolled out to them. And this got even more pronounced once David started to produce shows and host at Gaia, right? When that started to happen, David began to make really, really good money. Like, really, I believe Jay Weidner recently stated that David made $3 million from Gaia. Okay. Now, that's not including the money he made from Ancient Aliens, speakers' fees, books published on the and bestsellers, right? And I remember looking at David's chart, when I first started to get into it, and I thought, oh yeah, this guy's got a money chart, right? He's got a Jupiter-Pluto trine. Like that's a money aspect in astrology. And he has Moon in Taurus, and it sextiles his sun right there. So he's got a sun, moon, sextile, moon in Taurus, money, 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 money. And especially in the sixth house, which is work, purpose, service, all that stuff, right? And who does David have as his, I would say, largest demographic? The moon. It's women. Women love David, right? Older women love David too. Like, he was women wanted to mother David, moon in Taurus, right? They wanted to mother him. And yeah, and you get into that moon Venus sextile. That's another money aspect, especially if you activate it, right? And nobody could accuse David of not working hard. I mean, he did work hard. He had Mars in Capricorn, right? Exalted, conjunct the true node in Capricorn, and trining the moon. So it wasn't like people just gave him. David worked. He definitely worked for it. But once he got the ball rolling, and the machine was operating, there were always more and more opportunities for David, right? Like the more popular he became, the more it's just the way it is. It's life. The more opportunities rolled in, and the more money David made. And along the way, and this is where I think the conversation ultimately needs to go. Along the way, because David had everything. I mean, if you look at his position in the alternative world at that time, he had everything. He had the top slotted Gaia, according to Jay, made $3 million a year. He was making all these other speaker fees, and when he would show up, David he would be treated like he walked on water. Okay, I'm just being 100% here. Like David was like a spiritual rock star. And with Neptune in the first house, when things are going good, right, he's able to kind of just ride that wave, right? That's Neptune. It's like riding the wave. And again, full disclosure, I was not the biggest fan of David. And it was more, I'm not into the white hats thing. You know, does it mean, are there people out there that are working behind the scenes to restore the balance of the planet? Maybe, I don't know. If you're a white hat, a real white hat, why don't you give me a buzz? I'd like to know more about your activities. But I've never been like the white hat guy, right? I remember growing up, you know, there was this part of the New Age lore, right, was the Great White Brotherhood. And the Great White Brotherhood existed on a spiritual plane higher than the Earth dimension. And the Great White Brotherhood looked over the affairs of humanity. This is a theosophical idea, right? And so they're sort of like another generation's version of the white hats. And it's interesting that the color white would be in both. Dane Rudhyar would often talk about the Great White Brotherhood. He would if you read the Sabian symbols, they show up in there every now and then. But I never bought into that, right? And David has some other compelling things about what's going on in other planets and other stars. I mean, some of his work was compelling. You know, he was a very bright guy, and he was very good at synthesizing ideas and bringing them together. He was really, really good at that. Nobody's gonna, but I didn't always agree with his ideas. And I didn't, you know, he said at one point, Obama was working for the white hats. I'm like, what fucking universe are you living in? You know, yesterday I was at this big gathering. It was kind of cool. It was like, you know, I didn't want to go initially, but it was one of these May Day sort of get-togethers, and it was on this land that a friend of Joan had purchased. She's done an incredible job of this place. Let me tell you, I was very impressed. And I sat next to this guy, and I started talking about like Chabad Lubavitch, and I started talking about the Sabbatai V and and the Moshiach and all this, and he knew nothing about it. He absolutely, like, you know, have you heard of the Sabbatine Francus? Right? Do you know the Tikkun Olam? Like, this guy knew absolutely nothing. Like, no, I've never heard of any of this. I'm like, this is fascinating. You know, he's like, he was one of these guys that was just like, you know, hey, I'm into life. I feel good. You know, I'm a positive guy. And then he sits next to me. But I was kind of blown away by it. Anyway, Yeah, just the whole it was kind of like the reason I brought it up, it was the Obama thing. I'm like, "No, Obama's working for the White Hats? Really? How do you know that?" Right? And at the end of the day, how did that turn out? And there were just things that I philosophically could just not buy into. That's me, right? Like I'm a Scorpio rising like David, but I don't have Neptune in my first house. And I happen to be a Virgo, so I look at things a bit more critically. And while I respected his ability to bring these ideas together, and David was a really, really uh, he was a good orator and he had very good teaching skills, right? And you can see this with the Mercury Jupiter sextile, right? People that have that are really good presenters. He's got Jupiter in Aquarius in the third house. That's a big message, right? It's a big message about the Aquarian age. It's really like it's right there, it's encoded in the chart. And with Mercury, he was really, really good at it, right? And he, like I said, he helped build Gaia and that Jupiter Pluto trine, that's money. You know, that's other people's money. So he was again, he was quite good at it, even though I didn't necessarily agree with it. And my experience was that like I said, when I was there, David permeated Gaia. Even though he wasn't there, people were always talking about something that was going on with David or something that David had done or whatever. And I would go there and I would have lunch before I would shoot. And I forget who brought it up, but somebody said, "Did you know that David pays $20,000 a month in rent?" And it stunned me when I heard that. And I'm not going out of line. It was said amongst people there. No, I didn't have to sign an NDA. Right? David was living in Malibu, and he was paying $20,000 a month to live in Malibu. And on my Substack, which I just started, and one of the things that I'll share this with you. It's not quite finished yet, but this is part one. But I get into like the whole spiritual rock star vibe that has to live in LA. So this is what I'm going to break in right here. So talks with Jay Widener and Regina Meredith would often drift into topics David had covered in General David talk, which bordered on gossip. It was over one of these lunches where someone mentioned David was renting a place in Malibu for $20K per month. The reactions ranged from incredulity to, "Oh, that David." When I heard it, I thought it was more than a little over the top, but Guy was paying him very good money. He had generous speaker fees and books that were bestsellers, so why not? But I kept asking myself, why? $2,000 a month in Boulder, circa 2013, would get you one of the best luxury apartments in the zip code. If David wanted to buy a place, $400,000 in Louisville near Gaia HQ could get you a small mansion. David could have paid it off in 3 to 4 years. Living the life of a spiritual rock star. LA has always been the home of mega mystics and the royal paranormal. After World War II, LA SoCal was flooded with medium and mystics. Krishnamurti settled further up the coast in Ojai. Yogananda went south to Encinitas. Alice Bailey was a medium at an occult bookstore in Los Angeles. Gene Roddenberry, one of the most creative, spiritual, new agey sci-fi franchises of all time, Star Trek, lived in LA. Elizabeth Clare Prophet ran Summit University in Pasadena and Calabasas. You get the idea. Malibu is also where rich rock stars hang their hats. Axl Rose, Bob Dylan, and Rick Rubin, just to name check a few. David played guitar, jammed in bands, wrote some tunes, and checked the rock star part. How much is the price to pay for Aura? And this is where we get into the cultural side of all this. Well, living near the water and being a Pisces does have its advantages. Shelling out $240,000 in rent each year is an excessive price to pay for Aura. What does the Aura buy? Well, apparently it bought a lot. Not only were David's shows the most popular on Gaia, he was treated like a spiritual rock star everywhere he went. During the height of Wilcock's powers, we'll say from 2011 to 2017, people that met him either said he was the most beautiful soul they had ever met or one of the biggest assholes they'd ever run across, which is true, by the way. I've talked to a number of people who said he was more than a bit full of himself. Being treated as spiritual royalty has privileges, but it also comes with a very dark side. People can get lost in their own mythos, believe the hype, and over an extended period of time, it changes brain patterns, neuron shifts, and rewiring receptors. If it goes on for too long, the individual can lose touch with the material world. This effect has been studied on royals, and the first thing that goes is empathy and the ability to identify with another person's suffering. Now, I'm not saying that this is exactly what happened with David, but for many, he could walk on water, and for a susceptible Pisces, it's like giving whiskey to an Apache. Now, here's where the story turns. So we'll get back to his chart in a second. The content crisis. One day while I was at Gaia waiting to tape a show with Regina Meredith, I overheard a conversation in the control room that David was running out of content. That could not happen. David was Gaia's cash cow. He helped build the network with his divine cosmos material, the raw law of one teachings with talk of ascension, white hats, good aliens versus bad ones along the way. But the well was running dry. Enter Corey Good. It was right around this time that Corey Good, dazed and confused, entered the scene. Super soldiers were a big thing back then. Max Spears would go on to infamy, spilling his guts and ultimately taking his own life. The YouTube channel Bases chronicled the strange lives and confessions of men who were part of a secret, sometimes off-planet network of traumatized youth turned into time travelers, space jumpers, and off-world warriors. Corey fell into that bucket with the strange tales that, given the world of Bases and Project Camelot, seemed somewhat normal, at least on the fringe, so Corey fit right in. And this is where David's next round of content would come from and ultimately signal the beginning of his demise, which in some ways had started years before that, as David traveled the spiritual rock star circuit. From expos to ancient aliens, David lost something extremely valuable along the way: discernment. In part 2, we'll look at the blowback and the aftermath of what happens next. So what I am essentially making a case for, and it all has to do with Neptune, right, in the first house. It all has to do with Neptune. And after a while, if you are seen in a particular light, right, and you are the image of other people's projections, and those projections tend to veer into Christ-like avatar savior sort of territory, that level of interaction, I don't care who you are, will change your perception of not only who you are, but what you're capable of doing. And that if enough people practice what I would call spiritual enabling, then you believe your own hype. You get high in your own supply. And then you have to continue to live in a way that matches up to your own mythology. And one of the things that goes out the window along the way is discernment. Why? Because nobody is critically judging who you are or what you're doing. And that's not to say that David didn't have his detractors. And there are some people who believe that he was cyberstalked and bullied, and that may be true, right? But once you get into this space, this online world, it is open game. It's open territory, right? Like I had dinner last week with my buddy Giuseppe, and he has had his life threatened over 50 times, right? And the guy's got, skin is thick as a frog. I mean, he's watertight. And he just, learns to live with it, right? And some people are built for it and some people are not built for it. I get criticism, right? And I'll get him in the comments sometimes. And it's like, okay, well, how do I deal with this? If it's valid, I'll listen. If it's not valid, I'll push back. It just depends, right? And the hard part is when you do something and you kind of put your heart and soul into it, and somebody comes around and just takes a dump on it, and it's like, well, who the fuck are you, right? But if you do this enough, like you expect it, you get used to it. So even if David was cyberbullied, and I think this is where David also falls into this major paradigm shift. And when David occupies this space with Gaia, that's kind of this in-between world, right? It's kind of like cable has devoured regular TV. It's devoured regular TV. And at that time, people still would sign up for their cable packages. They don't do that now anymore, do they? Not as much. So when Gaia started its programming through an online subscription model, YouTube really wasn't very big. I mean, it was happening, but not like today at all. So Gaia occupies this really interesting space, right, where it's disconnected from normal like cable TV. Like you're not going to generally see Gaia on Comcast, right? But we haven't gone to the YouTube world yet, where there's chat rooms and comments and, all the things that go along with the Wild West. So for a period of time, right, David gets to create his material and here, let me be clear about this. Gaia had comments, like you could comment on shows, right? You could comment on shows. You could comment on my show. There's plenty of comments. But that was kind of the extent of it. Like, I don't think they had like chat rooms. Like maybe they did when the shows ran. I don't know. I can't remember. But it wasn't like because if you were paying a monthly subscription for Gaia, you were there for generally 3 reasons: David Wilcock, Regina Meredith, and whatever other kind of programming came along with Gaia. So if you're paying that money to see David and get into his work, and again, some of it was really interesting, you're going to tend to be less critical because you're paying for that experience. And if you're paying for that experience, you're going to ask yourself, well, why the fuck am I spending $11.99 a month to listen to this dweeb? Right? Like it just sets up a very different kind of transactional relationship. So what I'm getting at is that David was protected, right? He was buffered from a lot of outside criticism. And there was no TikTok. I mean, nothing was really, Facebook was taking off. That was it, right? It was Facebook. And I think David might have had a Facebook page and Gaia might have had a Facebook page. But again, there are people that curated those pages. And if there was a lot of negative comment or spam or negative comments that looked like spam, the curators of those pages would more than likely remove those comments because they had an investment in David and they wanted David's image and his material to be as pristine as possible. So he is able to develop like his ideas and his persona in this very interesting space, one that is really protected in a lot of ways. Had David come along in, I don't know, 2018 and started to do his show on YouTube, it would probably be successful because he's got some really interesting hard wiring in here, right? He's a good communicator. Cannot be denied that Mercury, Jupiter sextile, Jupiter in the 3rd house, Aquarius. But he also would have dealt with way more blowback than he ever had to deal with at Gaia, which just by the architecture that they built and the price point that they had, you weren't there to be critical of David Wilcock. You were there to take it in. You were there to be a part of David's ride, right? And what goes along with that is part of the dilemma that I'm approaching here, right? And the dilemma is that without any critical guardrails, David was allowed to evolve in a way that it was like the never-ending story. You know, when I think of David, just in general, right? When you look at him, you look at his face, and you kind of get a sense of his energy. To me, David he's like a prayer. You know, he's like this eternal magical child, right? And I have these images of him, you know, hanging out with Carrie Cassidy at Project Camelot. Like that's where he first shows up, right? And he's like the T boy in the recording studios in England, you know, that are just there to cut their teeth, right? And because he's in this protected environment at Gaia where there's not going to be a lot of outside criticism coming at him, he develops in a way that is, I think, ultimately, number one, fragile. And number two, like, he loses touch with discernment. And this is a big story for David. Where do I see that in the chart? Well, I think it's that moon square to Jupiter, right? Jupiter makes everything bigger. And the moon is in the 6th house, which is the house of Virgo. So the idea here would be, it's like, well, everything's an opportunity with the moon Jupiter square. Why should I, and I'm sure he's turned a few things down, but why should I turn anything down? And I think that along with Neptune, when you look at Neptune in his chart, like, what's it doing? He's got the opposition with Saturn, which we'll talk about in a bit. He's got that sextile to Jupiter, right? And again, that's a really, really powerful sextile, right? Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. He's got Neptune and Sag. Like, there is a part of David that's hooked up, right? I remember seeing his chart. I'm like, yeah, man, there's some things in this chart that give this guy some really, really interesting tools from an astrological perspective. Like, I remember, it's kind of like, and I'll use this as an example of somebody who falls into the same category. It's Russell Brand. Russell Brand is a spiritual rock star. More the Russell Brand now than the Russell Brand then. But again, if you want to look at Russell Brand's chart, if you want to deride Russell Brand and call him a pedophile or whatever, I mean, and there's things about Russell Brand's past that are shaky in some ways. And I'm not even talking about like the charges. I've read all the charges, and most of them are specious, by the way. But and again, I'm not a fan of Brand. He is who he is. He does what he does. But when I looked at his chart, I'm like, this motherfucker's got a pretty powerful chart. And like, I can see where this guy has some juice, right? And I can say the same thing about David's chart. Like, there's some big things here in this chart. The Neptune sextile to Jupiter, right? The Jupiter sextile to Mercury, communication, and the ability to express really, really big out there ideas, right? The hard work, with Mars in the 2nd house. Like, there are things here that are fairly significant. What's interesting is he's got almost all the asteroids, with the exception of Vesta, from house 12 to the bottom of the 1st house. He's got that Palace in the 12th house in Scorpio, which I think is pretty psychic, just in general, right? But it's retrograde. And I think it's an interesting placement, for sure. Doesn't mean that he was the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. I'm not so sure. So he's got this interesting chart, right? There are things here that, if you really break it down, oh yeah, hard worker, access to information, Jupiter, Neptune sextile, almost like channeling, right? The Jupiter sextile to Mercury, good teacher. Like, there are things here, right? And he's got Venus, Sun, Mercury, all in the 4th house. And hey, he pays $20,000 a month to live in a place in Malibu. That's very Piscean. Am I right? I just think that maybe the investment could have gone in a different direction, but that's just me. That's just my thing. But what happens is that because David exists in a bubble in Gaia, and he does. He exists in a bubble in Gaia, and it doesn't have the same critical guardrails that YouTube has. When I say critical guardrails, I'm talking about people that go in and challenge your ass. That wasn't happening in Gaia. Nobody inside of Gaia challenged David, right? Like I said, I was there he wasn't, but I felt him everywhere. Like his presence was all through that place. It was David, 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 David. Right? It was like that's what it was. And then he would go out and he would do these speaking tours and engagements, and everybody would interact with him in a way that, with Neptune in the first house, they would project right onto him. And people's lives, man, a lot of people's lives are very painful and fucked up. And somebody like David, who I would say was theoretically a positive person, like when he would present, right, it was with this idea that we're upgrading, we're ascending, we're getting ready to leave this hell realm, right? We got these people who are behind the scenes and they're working on stuff for us, and we're going to be just fine. And I'm here to give you the dispatches of the cosmos, and I'm going to give you some law of one to work with, right? And so people are like, thank you for this, because the world's a really fucked up place. And you have very youthful and there was an innocence about David, right? You look at him, there's a bit of an innocence about him. So that part also helped, right? Like, oh my God, I like this guy. He's funny, he's sweet, he's all these, and he's got a really great message, and I love this message. And and so there's what happens is that, and I'm not saying that any of these things don't have some validity. They'd have to have some validity in order for it to stick. But what happens is that people began to project onto him. And for many people, David became like a savior figure. And one of the things that I want to bring up here is that we're going to get into this chart where David actually dies. It's his death chart. David is very Piscean, right? From Neptune being in the first house to Venus and Sun and Mercury and Pisces down in the fourth house in the bottom of his chart. He's very Piscean. And we just came out of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. And they're in Aries now. And it's a very significant shift. It's a huge shift, right? It's like we can't, literally time-wise, like astrologically, you cannot sync this any better, right? Time-wise, we have come to the end of the Piscean savior Stockholm syndrome. And I don't care who it is, right? We have come to the end of that. Now, there's another discussion to be had, with Jesus, the second coming of Rambo. We'll talk about that a little bit with Saturn and Neptune and Aries, but that's a different discussion, right? Like the Jesus savior archetype in many ways died with David Wilcock. Done. Gone. And why is he that? Look at the chart. Neptune in the first house. Hello. Right? Neptune in the first house, the ruler of his chart. Stellium in Pisces. And there's a lot going on there with that stellium, including the squares with Saturn, which we'll talk about. So when David killed himself, and David did kill himself, what did he do? David blew his brains out. I'm just being honest here, right? And that is very Aries. Not only did he use a gun, he put it to his head. That's what happened. And there are things that took place in David's life along the way that contributed to his unfortunate demise. And I want to touch on some of those things because I think it's a real cautionary tale. Not that anybody is, I don't think is going to go through the same thing that David Wilcock went through. But because he ascended through Gaia in all of these circles in a very protected fashion. And again, my contention is that if you do these things long enough, you begin to buy your own press, you begin to get high in your own supply, and you believe that you can do very little wrong. And this is ultimately what leads to David's demise. And this is where Corey Goode comes into the picture. Now, I am not going to sit here and try to lecture you about Corey Goode. He seems, I'll use the word seem, he also seems to be very litigious. So I should probably watch what I say, but he seems to be a very divisive figure in this whole story. And there are some people who will defend Corey Goode, and then there are other people who will claim that Corey Goode is nothing but a grifter, right? And not just a grifter. He is a grifter with a purpose. Corey Goode is like a shark, okay? Now, this is what people say. I'm not really saying that. I'm just telling you what other people say, okay? And David's troubles really begin with Corey Goode because Corey gets into Gaia. And again, I'm watching this from a distance now. I'm no longer there, but I'm kind of seeing what's going on. It's like, oh, they filled the content gap with Corey Goode. This is it. This is going to be their new thing with David. And they needed to keep those subscriptions. Yep, they keep paying us that money, and we got to get some new ones too while we're at it. And so David and Corey go off in this direction where they're going to have children's books and the Blue Avians, and they're going to do, a graphic novel. I mean, they start to spin off, and they're going to create an industry, right? And Gaia is going to be the backer of this whole sort of cosmology that Corey is bringing to the table. And I wasn't there, but I'm going to go out on a limb and speculate that they looked at what was happening and they said, we got to pump the brakes on this. Because from the outside, and this is what I was seeing from the outside, that Corey Goode was taking over Gaia. And he was taking over Gaia through David, right? Because David was Gaia's golden goose. And it's like, whoa, listen, we're not ready to commit to a children's movie about this shit, right? And so they started to get pushback on their ideas for creating this sort of cottage industry inside of Gaia. And I believe when that happened, that it started a fracture between the Corey Goode, David Wilcock, Gaia relationship. And Corey no longer has the show, and David makes an erroneous decision, in my estimation, and chooses Corey over Gaia. I thought it was a bad move. I thought it was a bad move at the time. And then David writes this very long letter talking about how evil Gaia was, and how they treated their employees, and you can see this in David's chart. He's got that Mars Uranus square, which happens to be rebellious, right? Oh, by the way, Mars squaring Chiron in Aries, like nobody should have ever sold this guy a gun. That's a bad, and I mean a really bad gun aspect. So he writes this letter condemning Gaia and just accusing them of like employment malpractice, and I mean, I think there's even hints of like, child sacrifice and all this other stuff, right? Like it's a heavy, heavy, heavy indictment of the company. And this guy who runs Gaia, or ran Gaia, I think he's got his own supplement company now. His name is Yurka. And Yurka was not, I didn't meet him. I wasn't that important. But Yurka loved David. He loved David, right? I think David had this ability for certain people to be really charming. Maybe it was Neptune, and he could like reflect other people's vibes back to them, right? And so Yurka loved David. So for David to write this really long letter condemning Gaia, not only, and like I said, Yurka's not a warm and fuzzy guy, but he really liked David. And so when that happened, not only was Yurka crushed, but he also told David, like, you need to like take this down and you need to apologize, or we're going to take you to court and we're going to put you through the ringer, right? So, of course, David pulls that down and tries to do an apology. And I still think that the problems with Gaia were still lingering, even up until his death. I don't know to what extent. Jay Widener, who I do believe cared about David, although I will say this, and it may get me in trouble, is that ultimately Jay was the executive producer on all of these shows, including mine. So and I guarantee you, of all the people at Gaia that he had the most hands-on relationship with, it was David, right? And Jay has tweeted as much recently. So Jay co-signed on Corey, right? Jay basically said, okay, Corey, come on in. Let's start doing content. And I had Jay on my show, I don't know, I was still living in like my apartment in Fredericksburg, I think. I had him on my show. I think I was living in South Creek in Fredericksburg. And Jay was involved in this heavy litigation with Corey. Real heavy litigation. I think they still might be. I don't know to what extent. And Jay was really struggling to come to terms with like what had happened because he lost his job. Right. Jay came out and slandered Corey in public. And Corey leveled a lawsuit against Gaia and Jay for defamation of character and all the things that went along with it. And as a result of it, just because they didn't want to deal with the Jay litigation, Jay lost his job. And Jay had known Yurka for the better part of 20 years. Right? Jay told me stories about Yurka sending him to Europe. This is before they even started to do Gaia. Like, he knew him that far back. And Yurka was paying for Jay to go through, all of these old libraries in Europe to find as much hidden material as possible. That's how far back they went. So for Yurka to fire Jay was a really big deal. So Jay gets shit canned out of this deal. David writes this very defamatory letter towards Gaia and has been given a cease and desist. And eventually, I believe Yurka winds up selling Gaia, right? Like, I think he might have sold it to SoftBank. Anyway, so David aligns with Corey. And he had been at a company, and again, this is according to Jay, that had paid David $3 million over the course of his time there. And again, treated like a prince at Gaia. I'm serious. And he winds up choosing Corey Good. See, this is what happens when everything you do is like not heavily scrutinized, and the people around you are always commenting on how special or enlightened or whatever you are, right? You begin to lose discernment. And Neptune in the first house, he follows the wrong person. If he was really, really smart, and David was smart. I mean, he was an intelligent guy. Are you kidding me? He's got a Mercury-Jupiter sextile. Jupiter in Aquarius, third house. The guy's brilliant, right? If he's really smart, he's like, listen, Corey, it's been fun, right? This has been an interesting journey, but I'm getting off the spaceship, and I'm going back to the mothership. So wish you all the best, Corey. But he doesn't do that, right? He picks Corey Good. And, they, travel around a little bit, do a little this, a little that, but it's never going to add up to the success that he had at Gaia. I'm telling you that right now, because in the rear view mirror, we can see that. And I could see it at the time. Who was the other guy? Emery Smith or something like that. And they would do these roundtables or discussions. And I would watch the people in the audience, and they would look upon these guys with like absolute and utter worship. I'm like, this is just really, this is bizarre. I mean, this is the type of adulation that's reserved for gurus. I'm watching this. I'm watching their presentations, right? And then the comments that are being left. Now they're on YouTube, and the comments that are being left are laudatory. Oh, you guys are so great. I love the male energy and blah, 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 blah. Right? So it seems like it's going somewhere, but it really doesn't go much of anywhere. And then David begins to make other poor choices, right? And again, I don't want to get too deep into the guy's personal life, but he gets married, and let's go to Saturn in the 7th house in Gemini. Oh, right? Like if I was, coaching Mr. Wilcock, I would say, hey, dude, you better get married later in life, right? Because you got a lot of growing to do. And we've got Saturn in Aries, Saturn in Taurus, and then his second Saturn return in Gemini, right? Like that's the time you should get married. That's your time. But anyway, that's not the time that he got married. And this is where, again, David's lack of discernment, I think, really is another piece of his own demise because the marriage is terrible, right? It doesn't last. You can see from the outside, this woman is intense. She's a martial artist. She's got more yang than David could muster up in like 2 lifetimes, 3. I mean, this woman is, she's intense, right? And when they first got married, there was this interview with them. And I couldn't believe what I was reading in a lot of ways. I wish I could bring it up. I'm sure it's not still there, but the expectations of their marriage was very Neptunian, and the way that they were taught. I mean, it was kind of mind blowing, right? I'm like, and somebody's actually interviewing them about their marriage. Like, has anybody ever interviewed you about your marriage? And I'm not talking an opposing lawyer, right? Or your own lawyer, or maybe a therapist. Like, has anybody ever interviewed? Like, let's find out about your marriage. How did you two meet? It must be an absolutely synchronistic and cosmic tale. And we were regaled with that in the interview. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm sorry, this is my profane moment. And I do hope David's doing well somewhere. I'm like, he's fucked. They're fucked. Like, how can you start something like this where the expectations are so over the top, right? And what are we getting into? We're getting into that Neptune-Saturn opposition. Oh, boy. Right? It's like, hi, like to the world, he's Mr. Neptune. He's Captain Neptune. And people love him. Well, over in the relationship space, he's dealing with the hell of Saturn. And somebody who may or may not be like a fully integrated being in Gemini, right? Like he had Vesta and Saturn together. David needed one of two things. He either needed to marry an older woman, right? That would be an older woman, or wait for his second Saturn return, which would have been in 3 years, right? Saturn cycle Aries, Saturn cycle Taurus, Saturn cycle Gemini, boom. People have Saturn in the 7th house, marry later in life. Wherever Saturn shows up, it's later in life, right? I didn't start making reasonable money until I was 40. I spent roughly 20 years of my life kind of living hand to mouth. Wasn't fun. I mean, I figured out a way to economize, don't get me wrong, but I didn't start making significant money until I was 40 years. That's Saturn. I've got Saturn in the 2nd house, right? So if David had waited, like if he could have stepped back from the ledge and dealt with his issues, he could have married someone on his second Saturn return that I believe would have been a much better match than the person that he had married. He had no chance whatsoever. And when you read sort of the rundown of his life. There's a guy by the name of Spice, Mr. Spice or something like that. And he was one of David's longtime friends. And he was the last guy that David spoke with when, before David put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. And one of the things that he talks about is the ongoing issues that David had in his life, one of which was with his ex-wife. And I don't know if it was around money or I don't know. Apparently she, from what I understand, from what was told to me, that she actually came from a family with money. So I don't know if money was an issue or whether she just wanted to crush David. But they had gotten a divorce, 3 years ago, 4 years ago? I'm not sure how long, but their marriage didn't last very long. And you would think that people would move on, but apparently that was not the case. And, my sense is that when there are people who are in this space, I mean this space, like the one I'm in now, although with way more followers than me, there are women who see that person and say, you know what, I want to get to know that person because I have some goals of my own and maybe we can work together. Well, the work together thing goes away real fast. And what they're looking for is a way to promote who they are and what they're doing on the backs of the person who has built the network, built the following, and just step on up, right? I've seen this. We've seen this. And I believe, and I could be completely wrong here, it's my belief that this was a part of that relationship, right? In a hierarchy with David and his popularity, he was here, right? His ambitious wife-to-be was here. And her goal was to get to here, which she ultimately did because she married him. And then her goal was to get up here. That's my belief. Who knows? Maybe I'll get a bad comment from her. I don't know. I don't care. At the end of the day, his best friend said it was still an issue. How does he get to this place where he lets this woman into his life? And not only does it not work, but even years after it not working, it's still an issue. It's called the lack of discernment. And many men have this issue. We get flattered, we get love bombed, we think with our dicks, right? And the next thing you know, we're making bad choices. I got married in Las Vegas after knowing somebody for 3.5 weeks. So I can't say that I'm but that person that I married, we worked at the same company. I wasn't doing this, right? We were just, two people willing to fucking roll the dice. And I actually liked that about this person. That was one of the reasons why we did it. Like, you're going to do this shit? You're interesting. Let's go. Right? It had nothing to do with who I was. In fact, eventually who I became, what I was, that's when the issues started to creep in, but that's a different story. So now he's got this ongoing thing with this person, right? The Corey Good thing it's not going away, right? He's involved in a nasty lawsuit with Jay, right? I don't know what his relationship with Corey was like, but it's not going away, right? The ex-wife is not going away. And then he gets involved with this company. And a lot of people think, oh, well, David was involved with free energy. And, he was one of these scientists that They got taken out. No, this company was kind of a scam company. And it was a guy who had been working on this prototype for a jet for years. Years. And David invested $2 million in this company. $2 million. He got a seat on the board. And then what this guy did is he used David to get other people to invest in the company. And they lost all their money because this guy doesn't produce anything, right? They lost their contract. They had some grant money with the US government. They had hangar space, lost it all. Then the SEC started to get involved and sniffing around, and it's feeling a lot like the producers, if you know what I mean. And now David Wilcock is $2 million. He's out $2 million. And not only that, but there were people who loved David, who believed in David and the stories of free energy that were going to liberate all of us from the dark cabal. You know, and these are mom and pops, and they're throwing in 10 grand, 50 grand, right? Like, oh, we're going to invest in this company. They're going to be successful, and we're going to support this like quantum shift. And it doesn't happen. And now David has to bear the brunt of being the guy who all these people had trusted and invested in. And he loses $2 million to boot. What is the word that we have been tossing around here? Discernment, right? Again, David is in this environment where nothing can go wrong. And then he starts to make these life choices, serious life choices. And each one of those life choices has immense repercussions and consequences. From leaving Gaia and siding with Corey for whatever that's worth, right? Gaia built David, David built Gaia. You could say, well, it was time for him to move on. Well, that's fine, right? But then you have to be willing to deal with that. He marries this person who I think, my clear sense is that she wants to piggyback on David because she wants to be in internet. Again, we've seen this. We've seen this in this space, right? We've seen it in the space. And sometimes it's well-meaning. You know, Jamie Hanshaw and Freeman loved each other for a while until Jay Dyer came around. Jay Dyer was a better deal. You know, Jay Dyer was younger and, you know, charismatic, and Jay Dyer wanted to build shit. And Freeman wanted to go to thrift stores and hang out and be a hipster. Good guy. Love Freeman. Had him on the show a number of times. Been on his show. Freeman's an OG. But, you know, let's be honest, right? Jay Dyer walks into the picture and Jamie walks out with him. I'm just saying these things happen. And I don't know what happened to his wife. Maybe she found some other internet guy. I don't know. But this is what happens. I've seen it. So that's going bad. This company that he's lost $2 million with is going bad. And David starts to have problems with the IRS. And he starts through Neptune, right? Through Neptune. There was this guy who was commenting on David's death in this message board. And he worked at a dispensary in Colorado that David would come to a lot. And David really, really, really got into THC. in a very big way. And he was like, getting all big brain shit with it and fucking around with different THC compounds. Like he was very into it, right? Very into it. And you do that, and that will begin with Neptune in the first house. That is a bad move. It's a bad move with Neptune in the first house, especially with the Saturn opposition. But he probably wanted to escape what was going on with him. And you can say that he was targeted, that the dark hats were after him, the dark cabal was after him, whatever, right? Maybe that's true. I don't know. All I know is that David's discernment had him making major erroneous choices along the way. And he winds up in Netherland, Colorado. And if you've ever seen pictures of the place, it's fucking gorgeous, right? It's like this giant log cabin castle on the top of a mountain ridge. And he can't afford the mortgage payments. He's getting foreclosed, putting the house on the market. David Wilcock, by the time the police arrived outside of his place in Netherland, Colorado, was a broke and broken man. That's what he was. He was a broken man. And in a very fast-paced world of the internet and YouTube and Instagram, right? David, even though he was a pioneer in the digital subscription space, and I think did fairly well on his Divine Cosmos YouTube channel, don't get me wrong, but he's not making Gaia money. He's not making that $3 million over the course of however long he worked there to bail himself out of his current issues. Now, he could have scaled, right? And he could have scaled everything. Look, I got to just really minimize. I got to sell everything. I got to make a deal with the IRS. I got to go maybe get a 1-bedroom apartment somewhere and go live that life. But I don't think David could come to grips with that. I don't like for him to admit to his poor choices and failures would in some ways invalidate his own existence. Because in his mind, which was hey, he had a great mind, okay? I'm not denying that. In his mind, he had figured it all out, right? The galactic brain, he had figured it all out. But he hadn't figured out really how to like live and deal with setbacks. And some people say that he had a very rough childhood. I've heard some people claim that he was like sexually molested and triggered and traumatized when he was young. I don't really have necessarily a problem with that. Like if we're looking at it in the chart, it would be the 4th house, and all those planets are the ones that are probably the most challenged, right? The Neptune square to Venus, unrealistic relationships. Right? That would be one of them. The Venus square to Saturn. And again, relationships, that's not an easy one. And Saturn's the highest planet in his chart. It's the father. And in Gemini, again, I don't know David's dad, but I can tell you that Saturn in Gemini, he probably had 2 very distinct personalities. And he probably had a personality that was his domestic personality, and he had another personality that was his non-domestic personality, whatever that is, in David's life, right? Was his father a borderline schizophrenic with Saturn in Gemini? I don't know, but it feels to me it's one of those planets in his chart that's a real issue. A much better relationship with the mother, with the moon in Taurus, sixth house, encouraging her son's dreams, all those things, right? Uranus in the 11th house. Hello, that's Gaia, right? That's Gaia. He's doing Uranian programming in an 11th house environment. But he eventually gets into that Mars Saturn square. And I think this was all around the same time that, Saturn was conjuncting Mars in his chart and squaring Uranus. I'm pretty sure it was around that time, right? That was it 2017 to 2020? I think 2017 is when all the shit starts to go down at Gaia. And Saturn's going into his second house. And what do you got to do when Saturn goes in your second? You got to watch your money, right? And he's already coming out of that Saturn opposition. But you got to watch your money. Like, if you're going to leave Gaia and build your own platform, well, you got to be smart, and you can't be spending a shit ton of money. Not with Saturn going through your second house, and particularly in Capricorn. And once it went into Capricorn, well, that was really early on. That was 2009, started to square Pluto. David hadn't really taken off yet. Okay. I want to talk about the community that enabled David. And I have seen this. I have seen this so many times where there are people who are celebrated, at times worshiped by other people because they believe those people have the answers and that they talk to them in ways that they feel directly connected to. And it's all different, but it's all the same. And I'm not going to name names, but some of these people have been on my show before. Have I been on their shows? I don't know. But it's the enabling of the cult of personality that ultimately, I believe, had a major hand in David's demise. And you could attribute it to dark forces or the cabal or skull to voice technology, voice to skull, whatever, right? Technology. And maybe some of those things played a part. Maybe they did. But when you are somebody who is in this community and you are celebrated everywhere you go, and very few people are critical of who you are and what you're presenting. And I made my case. David came of age inside of Gaia, which was an insulated environment. There was no critical pushback whatsoever. And if there was, I'm pretty sure that the people at Gaia would go in and pick off some of those comments. So what you would read would be adulation. Oh my God, what a great program. I learned so much, And some of that could be true. There are people that are in chat right now saying, fuck you, Robert. I learned a lot from David. I'm not saying you didn't. Right? The guy was bright. He had a great way. Look, he had a Saturn Uranus trine. You get a Saturn Uranus trine, you could take abstract concepts ahead of their time, Uranus, and break them down and make them essentially digestible to the masses with Saturn. The guy had some gifts, right? I have not been skinny on the gifts here in the chart. I didn't always agree with what he had to say, but that doesn't mean that he didn't have gifts. And that doesn't mean that there are times where he was actually teaching you something. So I'm not here to like invalidate your relationship with David if you learn something. Okay. What I'm here to make a statement about is that we as a community often put people on a pedestal and they will never live up to who we make them out to be. And with David, with Neptune, like in the first house, he's going to be a recipient of that in a very big way. Right? So what I'm positing here is that David was spiritually enabled by an entire community. And by doing so, it thwarted his ability to develop discernment, which led to a series of horrendous choices, which ultimately culminated on the 20th of April at 11:05 a.m. That's what killed David. David was not ready to deal with the hard times that he knew was coming. And so and I'm not saying this out of any condemnation for anybody that like really liked David and had the spirit of love. I get all that, right? But when he pulled that trigger, who really pulled that trigger? Was it David? Or was it a whole host of people that led him to that moment that helped him pull that trigger, including an entire community that in some ways was unwilling to question David, right? And I'm not saying you killed David personally, but when somebody is continually feted and treated like in some ways a demigod, right? It really affects their thinking and choices and decision making. And when that stops happening, right? When that supply runs dry, the person who had been connected to all of that begins to really, really question who they are and what it was all about. So what I want to do now is I want to bring in the chart of the day that David died. And again, I am doing my very best to be as compassionate and empathetic for David, okay? But I'm not going to sit here also and not make an observation on the culture. And the culture, again, we live in a world that is really fucked up. And and I'm telling you, like, it's about to get even weirder and more fucked up, right? So when people see David and a projection of David, and we'll call it positive Neptune, right? They're like, all in. I'm all in. I believe it. I believe you. I believe you, brother. Because his message was ultimately like one of hope, right? We're going to get out of here. We're going to ascend. We're going to the fifth. The light bodies are coming in, right? The white hats are making sure that the dark cabal is not going to, I mean, this is what people wanted and needed to hear. And it gave them hope, right? Like what like when their relationships suck or they get laid off or the world is, sort of falling off the edge of a cliff. There's David Wilcock telling you that it's going to all be okay. And why wouldn't you listen to that if your reality, if you're looking for a path out, right? Everybody's kind of looking for a path out. Like we're in samsara. So the Christians are looking for a path out. And their path out is Jesus. That's the path out. It's Jesus. Right? If you're a Muslim, the path out is Muhammad. If you're Jewish, the path out is a half off sale. I'm just kidding. But you know what I'm saying, right? And so David represented like a path out. Oh, here's a guy. He's got answers. Not only that, he's kind of cute and he's kind of nerdy. And there's no way a cute and nerdy guy can lead me wrong because he's cute and nerdy. There's nothing menacing, and he doesn't look like Rasputin or Charlie Manson, right? Like, I trust this guy. Part of David's secret sauce, right? But at the end of the day, like, not enough people questioned David and his choices. They just kept looking the other way. And even now in his death, right, there's some other thing that caused it. They were after him. He was targeted, and there's this, there's that. Well, maybe that's all true. But if you make good fucking decisions, that stuff doesn't get to you as much. It just doesn't, because you don't leave yourself open to be vulnerable. I am not perfect. I have made some stupid fucking choices in my life. I just spent close to $9,000, right? $9,000 because I had it around and I have a car to sell, which is going to be around the same price. So I've done the math. I just spent $9,000 on a 2001 Jaguar XJ8. There's going to be 90% of the people in chat, they're going to say, Robert, that was stupid, right? Where's your discernment? I'm like, well, my discernment was it's only got 42,000 miles on it. And I bought it from Winston Churchill's great nephew. So it must be okay, right? I'm just giving you some backstory about the car. And I hope it works out. I hope I like it, right? I like it. It's a cool car. It's in great shape. And I think even at that price, I got a very good deal. And when I sell the other car, it evens out anyway. So it is what it is, right? But we do make bad choices. I make bad choices. But the thing is, though, like when I made my bad choices, nobody knew who the fuck I was. And even when I was doing this, and I certainly was, not at David's level. Do you think I stopped making bad choices? Oh, I made quite a few. I just didn't proclaim that I had all the answers, right? And I've been pretty private about lots of areas of my life. So if I made a bad choice, guess what? You weren't going to hear about it because it didn't concern you. It didn't concern my work. But with David being such a prominent figure, making these choices at a level where he couldn't fuck up, like in his mind, like if I made a bad choice, I didn't have a lot to lose. David had plenty to lose. plenty of money, plenty of cachet. Like he had plenty to lose. And when you get to that point, you got to be really, really clear about your choices because you've built something, right? You have built something. You've built a legacy. You've built, a fortune. The guy was worth $3 million at one point, probably more. And if he hadn't been paying $20,000 a month on his rental in Malibu, who knows how much more he could have kept of that. I'm not making a judgment. I just wouldn't have done it. But that's me. I'm a Virgo. He made seriously bad choices when he was near the peak of his powers. And so when you make those bad choices and they begin to accumulate, right, one after the other, after the other, after the other, and you've been up here and now you're down here, the bad choices become much more amplified and magnified. And they're hard. They're much harder to deal with. Much, much harder to deal with. So could he have been targeted and all the other things that people are claiming that happened to him because, well, David just wouldn't do that? Did some demonic force get inside of him and pop his brains? Right? Maybe that's true. But they don't get there unless you let them in. And you let them in when you make horrendous choices and your ability to deal with those choices becomes hampered. And the next thing you know, it's a burden that you cannot, it's a weight and a burden that you cannot lift. So I was very interested in what was going on in David's chart the day that he died. And one of the things, and we have talked about this, right? I think I might have talked about it 2 weeks ago. It's the Neptune-Pluto opposition, right? We talked about it. I know some of you know what I'm talking about because some of you asked me questions about it. David was going through the Neptune-Pluto opposition. There's Neptune in Aries. There's Pluto in Libra. Hello. Like, what do you have to do with a Neptune-Pluto opposition? You have to let go, right? You have to let go of the things that you think were really, really important and intrinsic in your life, right? And I'm not talking about his life and ending it. Like a Neptune-Pluto opposition, I'm not here necessarily to judge David, okay? But I'm just looking at his chart. In his case, the Neptune-Pluto opposition would have been to say, it's over, right? Like, this is over. This part of my life is over, right? The whole Gaia thing, the whole spiritual rock star thing, like YouTube, it's over. I need to walk away from it. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I need to have closure on this part of my life. And what he did instead was he ended his life, right? And this is really the part of the algorithm of the Neptune-Pluto opposition that I really want people to get and to understand is that when you go through it, you let go. Right? The whole idea here, I mean, it's 52, between 51 and 53, depending upon where Pluto and Neptune are. You let go of the silver cord, right? Like Pluto, this is the silver cord, whatever it is, and he's got Pluto right there in the 10th and the cusp of the 11th, and it's, 10th house popularity, part of fortune, 10th house, Pluto ingressing into the 11th. Let it go, man. Let it go. And the whole idea, right? And even for somebody like David, is that if you really, really believe in God, right? If you believe in God, if you believe that there's a creator who has your best interest at heart, and I do believe that because I've been there and I've fucked up and I have felt that go away, and you don't want to experience that. David could have trusted the process and moved into that sextile, Neptune to Neptune, right? Like that's how it's supposed to work. That's how it's supposed to work. For David, this was a timing issue, right? Like Neptune went into Aries on, what was it, right around February 15th, right? Saturn was there too, so he's got a Saturn-Pluto opposition. And he had Saturn and Neptune in his 4th house. And he was having to move, right? He couldn't afford that place. That's what Saturn does in the 4th house. I can't tell you how many readings I've done for people when Saturn goes through their 4th house, they fucking move. A lot of times they'll downsize or whatever, right? Like for me, I had to move my mother and then we moved together, right? Saturn 4th house. Mother happens to be a Pisces. And when you have Saturn and Neptune in the bottom of the chart, you are literally bottoming out, right? Like here's the topper right there. David really starts to come into his own around 2008. Saturn's coming into his 10th house. Probably around the time first time I saw him, I think. Right around there. He was speaking at this, what is it? Life and Living Arts Festival or some shit like that in Santa Rosa. He was on the main stage. It's right around 2008. That's the launch of David Wilcock. Health and Harmony is what it's called. Some of you might have attended. Now Saturn's all the way down in the bottom part of the chart. He was up here, all good. Down here, uh-oh. I have been going through Saturn in the bottom of my chart, right? David had Neptune and Saturn crossing his sun. I think it might be better than what I was going through when I had Neptune and Saturn opposing my sun. That was not fun, right? That's when I gained like 35 pounds of water weight because my heart was failing. I was bottoming out. I was wondering, should I even be doing this fucking thing? Right? I'm really having these thoughts, right? And is this over? And it's like, well, shit, man. I was here before in 1996, 97, Saturn going through my 4th house. And I literally had to have that transit go through my 8th, my 9th, all the way up until my 10th house. And that's when I took off, ironically enough, in 2008. That's a 14-year transit. When you're at a certain age, like David is young enough, right? Like he's still had time. He's 50, 52, 53. And there's a lot that can happen with Saturn, including his return, where I think he could have met somebody. But he was bottoming out, literally, figuratively bottoming out. And he had Mars going through his fourth house, which was absolutely turgid. But he had a window, right? Like he had a window in order to make changes. And those changes were when Mars was going through his fourth house. It's going to hit his sun. I got to fucking change, man. I gotta change my life. I gotta let go. I just gotta let go. I don't give a fuck. I'll go get a 1-bedroom apartment and I'll go live in some little town somewhere, and I'll try to get maybe a programmer job, which I don't know what David would do, but I'm sure he could figure it out, right? And then I'm just going to downsize, declare bankruptcy, try to work with the IRS, write a letter of apology to these people that sunk all their money into this fake ass company that took $2 million of my money, right? Like, just go do that shit and let it go, right? There's a chance that if you're David Wilcock, you'll be David Wilcock again, but in a different environment. And there are some people who say, well, he came here, he did what he was supposed to do, and now he could go, right? Maybe that's true. But usually what happens is that some external force determines that, right? Like, and David, let's be clear, I have heard the recording, right? I have heard the recording of the cops who show up at his place. Nobody was there to shoot David other than David. I played it earlier, like not here on the show. But he didn't have to do that. But he had a window. And if you're asking me from an astrological perspective, he missed the window. Because by the time he has begun to really deal with all this tension and could not simply let go and just, float like a leaf downstream with the Neptune trine. Mars shows up. Mars in Aries shows up and opposes Pluto. Right? And what's he got? He's got Chiron in Aries in the 5th house. Not good. Not good. Like, if I had David as a client and I saw this coming, I would have had a very serious discussion with this fellow. Very serious discussion. Okay. He needed to let go before Mars and Saturn and Neptune and Mercury all oppose Pluto. Because when you look at this, it's like the deck is stacked against him. This is critical mass. The chamber's loaded, right? Had he made a conscious decision when Mars was in Pisces and said, I'm going to sell this house, I'm going to get out of here, I'm going to shut down the YouTube channel, I'm going to tell people, and I'm going to take some time off, I have lots of issues that I have to deal with. I have legal issues. I've got issues with the IRS. I've got issues with this company that I've spent $2 million on, and it's gone. And there are people that invested in that company, and their money's gone, and I feel horrible. And I need to take time out to make amends and deal with this mess I created in my life. If he had done that prior to Mars going into Aries, David would still be alive. He would still be alive. But I don't think that David could let go. And that's the Neptune opposition to Pluto, right? He couldn't let go of the things that had brought him wealth and fame and popularity. He couldn't let it go. He couldn't just trust, right? Like even in this chart, like if somehow he managed to not pull the trigger, the vertex was conjunct Neptune. He would have found out more about who he was through the kindness of others. What had happened? And at the end of the day, it's completely and utterly tragic. And we have the moon Saturn conjunction and the moon in Gemini. And oh God, just the drama that was probably set into motion by that union, that marriage that he had. Who knows what kind of conversations that may have triggered prior to that day. And I'm not saying anything happened, but when I see that, I'm like, oh, that's a stinger, right? And then he had Jupiter conjuncting his south node in Cancer. And what is Jupiter going to do? It's going to make those things on the south node a lot bigger, and not really in a good way, right? Like when I was really not doing well, I had Mars going through my 10th house. And normally a Mars transit in my 10th house, that's money. Like I'm kicking ass. I'm active, I'm doing readings, but it was also conjuncting the south node in my 10th house. And I ran out of energy. My heart ran out of energy. And I was watching this thing happen in real time. I'm like, holy shit, this is Mars. This is what Mars is doing. And I had Saturn and Neptune on my sun, opposing my sun in my 4th house. And I was having my own version of David's crisis, except it was really pulling me down. Because in my chart, my sun is up here. That's where my sun lives. Right. And these planets were like sucking me down at like 28, 29 degrees. Because my sun is at 29 degrees. And quite frankly, I'd rather go through the conjunctions than the opposition. At least the conjunctions, you get to Saturn Sun conjunction. It was time for David to leave his past behind, right? That's how astrology works. When Saturn was in Pisces, like a whole 28-year cycle came to a close for David. And from that point forward, he needed to let go of the past. And that's on top of the Neptune opposition with Pluto. And then Saturn gets involved, and it's like, well, people are going to judge me. I'm going to be judged. I think ultimately that was the final piece for David, was judgment. Judgment. that the person that he was and had been created, right? Because I've been talking about the creation of David Wilcock in addition to the life of David Wilcock, which are two separate things in many ways, right? Like he would have had to have let that go. Said, you know what? I'm done. But because everything had been so built up, and again, I'm going to use the word enabling, just tons of spiritual enabling with no valid critique or criticism during the time when David became David, which were the Gaia years, really the Gaia years, in an insulated environment where he was everywhere and could do no wrong. And even when he would show up at events, right, he was always treated, incredibly well. That was the part of his life that he had to let go of on a success side. The other part of his life that he had to let go of was the failure. And that would be, for me, the post-Gaia years and his involvement with this company and the money he lost and the reverberations of a marriage that failed, that didn't seem to go away. And like he would have to let go of that. Everybody fails. We all fail. The problem, the challenge for David is that he failed when he was near or at the top. And that is a hard, hard, hard fall. It's a really hard fall. So I'm not sure how much more I have to add here. He had the Pluto moon square going on as well. Feeling trapped, right? Like the Pluto moon square is, it's like Persephone in the underworld. I mean, we talked about that. He had Pluto going through his third house. I mean, I think David, I was watching that last video, and a lot of what David was saying is true. Right? A lot of what he was saying was true. But what he was also ultimately saying was that this thing is happening and we're all going to get it. And we're all going to, jack up to the next level. And in that regard, what more did he have to say? Right? Now, my feeling is that he would have had more to say had he stuck around. And he could have told a really good redemption story, right? But he would have had to have confronted himself. And I'm not sure David ever really I'm not in the guy's bones. Maybe he has some of these moments in Nederlander, Colorado, but I'm not sure he ever really had to confront himself. And when he did, I'm not sure if he had the requisite skills to deal with that, because even though he studied psychiatry at Schenectady College, I'm not sure that was enough. Or else he could have, look, when you have a kid, right, when you have a child, it shapes your decision-making process in very significant ways. And because I have a son, right, there were choices that I made because of him And most of them, I think, were good. Some of them were probably, um, looking back, probably could use some review, which I have done. Right? I mean, some of the choices that I made were not always the best. And I've actually had those conversations with my son, and very hard conversations. And a lot of you parents out there know what I'm talking about, right? You were the cause of this, or you were the cause of that. And, and you get you know, the full download. And it's not always easy to deal with that. Right. But as a parent, that's part of the game. And we did it with our own parents. It's just part of the game. And I'm not saying this to be judgmental about David, but David didn't father any children, right? He was 53, he had no children. And that's okay. There are people that don't have children, and I'm not condemning you if you don't have a child. But I think in many cases for men, if they don't have children, they themselves wind up being children for a long time, probably longer than they need to be. And I think this was one of David's issues, was that his Peter Pan-like fantasy had come to an end. It had come to an end. I mean, he lived in Netherland, right? Which is like Neverland. But it's also like the Netherland, which is this in-between place between this world and the next. Very strange place to wind up in. Very strange. Now, had he married somebody who was perhaps not as spiritually ambitious as the person that he wound up being legally married to, maybe perhaps he could have had a regular relationship marriage, and not one that was built on soulmate fantasy. And I mean, trust me, if you read the interview, I'm not even sure it's up anymore, you would see what I'm talking about. It was not a relationship that was very grounded in reality. Had he married somebody who was just, let's say, really cool and kind of a plain Jane, but a nice, good look. And, I'm not saying he had to marry, somebody bland or boring, but let's say he married somebody who was really domestic and just wanted to have kids and stay at home and, cook David's soup, right? Like, that would be a pretty good deal. And by having kids, he would have made different decisions, because at a certain point, you're like, man, I don't want to fuck my life up for my kids. And they become a really big part of like shaping one's character. He didn't have that. He did not have. And again, I'm not saying it's a prerequisite for growing up, but it kind of accelerates the process. And for those of you that do have kids, you know what I mean. And for those of you that don't, and you have special relationships with your nephews or your cousins and whatever, nephews usually, or nieces, God bless you. I hope that you are a positive influence in their lives. And that in times of crises, when they can't talk to their parents, they can come to you and you can give them good, sound advice. And you can play that role, right, if needed. So I'm not here to denigrate anybody that doesn't have children. I'm just saying that when you do, it shapes you and you create different life choices based on it. David didn't have to do that. So I'm not sure how much more I have to say about this, with the exception of the fact that David's death for me is ultimately symbolic. And his death is the death of the Piscean savior complex, that there's nobody out there who is going to save us, right? Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, brothers and sisters, you got to save yourselves, right? Little Pluto and Aquarius, you connect up with some other people that are involved in the same journey. That's what it's about, right? That's what it's about. You can tune into my channel. I'll tell you about astrology. I'll tell you about what I think is going on. And some of you will leave comments here and they'll say, I've been listening to you for the last 6 or 7 years. I don't always agree with what you have to say, but I come back because you make me think, or you're interesting. And you know what? You should do that, right? Question what I have to say. I'm not always right, right? But I hope you come back, because at the very least, I'll give you something to think about, like tonight. Did I give you something to think about here? Were you able to see this from a different angle, in one that I hope I wasn't being all that judgmental? I'm just trying to explicate the truth under circumstances where a cult of personality was created. And there were plenty of people along the way that enabled that. Plenty. And when the walls came tumbling down and the cult of personality could no longer be sustained, David could not handle it. He was not equipped to handle it. And he may have had entities, and he may have had all these other things, right? But at the end of the day, if he was solid and sound inside of himself, had made good choices, and look, we all dabble in a little cannabis every now and then, but David went really after it. Right? He really went after it. Who knows how that affected his brain chemistry? I think he was trying to get off of it. I'm just saying, right? Just saying that had he made better choices, these outside forces or inside forces, or whatever the fuck you want to call them, they have a far lesser chance of getting inside of David Wilcock's brain and tell him to put that gun to his head and pull the trigger. That's what I'm talking about. And it's over, right? It's over. It's time to end the worship of these semi-saviors, right? Because they go down. They are all meant to fall. They're all meant to fall. And you can like certain people. I like that show. I want to tune into that show. But always use your discernment. The one thing that David sacrificed along the way, so that he could continue to hear nothing but great things about who he was, which set up a chain of decisions that ultimately led to this moment. Always use your discernment. Always. In any part of your life, right? Always ask questions that are uncomfortable, whether they're about you or whether they're about somebody else. You can ask those questions internally, or you can ask them externally. And most people, how do I say this? They're not prepared to be asked questions about whatever it is they're serving up as reality. And that doesn't mean that you have to question everything, although it kind of helps. But some things you want to be magical. And you're like, oh man, I really don't want to question this. Can I please just enjoy this? Can I please just enjoy Carlos Santana's music before I find out that he was a pedophile? Right? Like stuff like that. And I'm not saying he's a pedophile, by the way. I'm just using that as an example. But use your discernment. It's vital. It's vital. And then figure it out. You're the one. You're the one. Right? This was David's message before he departed, which I think is rather timely and poetic in a lot of ways. I don't think he had to kill himself. It's unfortunate. But he also needed to humble himself, which he couldn't do. He couldn't do it. Anyway. All right. I wanted to move on to something else before we get out of here tonight. And if you're still here, thank you for being here. I want to talk about Uranus and Gemini briefly. And we just came out of Uranus in Taurus, right? So Taurus is like the natural world, right? Isn't that what Taurus is? It's like the natural world. And I don't know how many, look, I don't want to show you the images because I don't like ticks. I don't like them. You know, I used to have a dog and I'd go hiking and I'd always have to pick those fuckers off. I hated ticks. Ugh. There's only one other insect that I hate as much as ticks, and it's mosquitoes. Hate them both. I can live with flies. I had an interesting psychic connection with a fly one time. It was a trip. I was like kind of bonding with the fly. It's like, oh, it was interesting. It was like, he was on my lap. I was at a lecture, and I just started to like kind of like, you know, connect with this fly. And I put my finger over there, and he'd climb up my finger and start walking around on my hand. I'm like, fuck, man. I'm kidding. He didn't fly away. He's like, you know, he was like, thank God somebody's taking a positive approach to my life. Somebody's seeing me as being other than a fly. I think he really responded to it. He was like, oh, you're not trying to swap me? Oh, okay. I'll be your friend. I swear to God, it happened. I wanted to take him home. Anyway, let's talk about the ticks. So a couple of weeks ago, I was on a message board, and there was this guy who said this. He said, I fly a plane in Canada, and 2 times a year, I dump millions of ticks from the sky. And he said, the amount of money they pay me to do this is quite large. What do you think this guy's making to dump these ticks that he knows are genetically fucking modified, and they're going to wreak havoc on what's below? How much do you think is enough for him to do that? I think this guy gets paid a couple of $1 million, maybe more, right? How much would it take? Like, here, we're going to pay $150,000 to drop these ticks. And he knows full well what these ticks are going to do. Like, is $150,000 enough? And it's him and another guy, by the way. Like, that's not enough money. You know, like, what is soul changing money? It's got to be a couple of mil at the very least. So he talks about these 2 times a year, in the spring and in the fall, and he drops them over Ontario. This is just one guy, right? And normally we drop dog ticks, but this year we're dropping deer ticks. Okay. I read about this 5 or 6 weeks ago, and I sent this to Misaki. I said, man, you got to check this out. This dude is like fucking parachuting millions of genetically modified ticks into the environment. And that's just in Canada, right? So all of a sudden, all of these ticks are showing up everywhere. And they're showing up in numbers that are kind of unprecedented. And I don't want to show you the pictures because it's getting late. And if you're still here, I don't want you to have nightmares just based on the pictures. But these ticks will go after anything in their path. It doesn't matter whether they're snakes or whether they're elk. It doesn't matter. And when you see the multitude of the ticks on the bodies of these animals that are now dead, it would blow your fucking mind. Like, there's no room left on the animal's exterior for anything. And the ticks are bloated, right? They're just filled with all that blood. And I'm like, holy shit, right? This is a problem. It gets even worse. Apparently, these ticks are not your standard tick. Apparently, they jump like fleas. So what have they been doing with Uranus and Taurus? Oh, we're about to find out, right? Like, fucking Pandora's box is going to be unleashed. All this genetically modified shit. Nature, or start off as nature, right? Coming to a town near you, right? And so when we get to Uranus and Gemini, we're not just talking about any old tick anymore. Oh no, we're talking about a fucking super tick. And it's Gemini, right? So it used to be like your regular tick, but now it can jump like a fucking flea and apparently moves incredibly fast. And this woman, like, she got a bell pepper and she opened it up and there's a fucking tick in her bell pepper. Are you kidding me? Right? Like, so we're just at the start of this. And Uranus and Gemini is going to have lots of surprises, and some of them are not good, because I think that they have been fucking with nature for the past 7 years in the laboratories with Uranus and Gemini and Uranus and Taurus. And they're going to unleash the simulacra of nature, but it won't be natural. It'll be modified onto us, right? So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to quarantine these wooded areas. That's what's going to happen. And if you're somebody, like I'm telling you right now, if you're a nature person and you go out into the woods, hell, you may even just go out in your backyard. They're finding like boxes of these ticks at the base of people's fucking trees. Okay. You may find these ticks crawling around your house. But if you go out in nature and you say, I'm going to go on a hike with my dog, you better be really on the fucking ball. Really on the ball. If you have a cat that is an outdoor cat, when your cat comes in, you better check that cat for ticks. And don't fuck around. As soon as that cat walks through that door, you get that cat and you start looking for the ticks. And apparently they're not easy to kill, these ticks. And you can't let them go. You cannot, right? Like you got to go somewhere like and isolate your cat and just deal with it, right? And burn the fucking tick. These things are bad. They're really, really bad. Oh, and guess what? Pfizer just came out with a new Lyme disease vaccine. Wouldn't you know it? Wouldn't you know it? You know what's interesting about Lyme disease? For the longest time, the AMA did not recognize Lyme. Is that interesting? Like if you wanted to get Lyme, they started to come up with these Lyme panels finally. And if you wanted to get your Lyme disease treated, you know what you had to do? You had to take a super amount of antibiotics. Like, and most doctors would only prescribe you like 10 days or 15 days, right? No, like if you were going to get rid of Lyme, you would have to go like a month on antibiotics. And then you would have to change it up and do a whole nother round of a different antibiotic. That is how you got rid of Lyme, at least from the medical world. And most doctors couldn't prescribe more than 3 weeks of antibiotics, but you needed more. And then you had to build your pile back up and your gut back up because the antibiotics would just ruin it. But you had to get rid of the Lyme, right? That was how you got now. Now they're not only recognizing Lyme disease, well, Pfizer's got a vaccine for Lyme. Imagine that. And imagine the fact that we are living in the summer of fucking ticks. And then imagine your favorite wildland, woodland being shut down, quarantined because the ticks, right? And what happens when these ticks start to infest pasture cows? What happens if these pasture cows are slaughtered and their meat has become infected with something that the ticks will carry that will make it so that you will become allergic to eating meat, because there are ticks that already exist that do that. And people that get bit by them can no longer eat meat. Ain't that something? And who's the person that is behind lab grown meat? Meat that looks like meat, tastes like meat, but maybe there's a few things left out of the amino chain, namely the thing that makes you allergic to meat. Who do you think owns that? Yeah, sounds a lot like Bill Gates, doesn't it? So now all of a sudden we can't eat the cows, but we can eat the lab-grown meat, or we can eat the fake meat, the impossible meat, which has been, nobody wants that shit, right? But if the cows are now infected and the cows can infect the people, well, we haven't even gotten into the milk part. What's that going to do to us? And I'm not even talking about like the wilderness shit where you'll find elk covered from, horn to tail in literally thousands of bulbous ticks that have sucked the blood out of the poor elk. This is an aspect of Uranus and Gemini that we are going to have to deal with. Why? Because they have been fucking with nature for the past 7 years with Uranus and Taurus, and now they are going to unleash Pandora's box on us. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Now, that said, there's probably a way to deal with the ticks because we're human and we're smart, right? So I think the way to deal with the ticks is to find the frequency that the ticks operate at. Everything has a frequency. Everything. And then what you figure out is you figure out a tone generator that has the frequency of the tick, right? And then what you do is you dial into that frequency with the tick, right? So the ticks around you, right? You're now like in their field with this tone generated frequency. And then what you do is you just amplify it, right? And you it's like, okay, we're at level 5 and you're vibing with this tone, right? At level 5, we're going to spinal tap 11, and then you basically blow these fuckers up from the inside out. Or at the very least, they stay away from you, right? Because the frequency is too high, right? It's enough that they will be resonant with the frequency, but then you turn it up and then the frequency is more than they can handle. I think that's the way to go about it. That's some Uranus and Gemini shit, right? We're going to have to find the way the world is going. We're going to have to find ways on a frequency level / vibrational level. The frequency level is where things operate at in the world. Hilda Clark cracked the code. I think she did a great job, but she's also was kind of incomplete in her work, right? Everything has a frequency. Everything exists at a frequency. So you find the super tick frequency, you dial it in, and then basically you have like a test, right? Like, oh yeah. Look at that tick. Oh, it's just jumping around that frequency, right? So you've got it in like a petri dish or something. Let's turn it up to 10, right? Oh, we got it. That's it. We got it. All right. Fuck you, ticks. What do you got next? Right? This is where we're going to have to go. Like the technological genius is there. I know it is. I just thought of it. I'm not sure I can do it, but I just thought of it. Seems like it's a lot better than burning down 10,000 acres of land. And I'm sure the fucking ticks would survive that anyway. Right? So a little bit of an insight in Uranus and Gemini as it evolves And we're going to see a lot more of nature that's been hacked, nature that's been modified, nature that's been turned into a form of technology, right? That's what we're dealing with. Who knows? Maybe these ticks are little tiny fucking drones. Who the fuck knows what they are? They're not normal, though. They're not normal. And I did not mean to end the show on this note, but we're getting towards the end, and I've been doing this for 3.5 hours. And I want to thank you for being here and hanging out while I got a bit of a late start tonight. But hey, listen, we shall overcome. I really believe that. I really do believe that. But I don't have any. I'm not connected to any space brothers or white hats or anything. Like, it's just what I can deduce and extrapolate from where these outer planets are. And I went to a this kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, techno hippie pagan party yesterday. And it was great. I didn't really want to go, but I had a great time. Met a lot of nice people, real people with real jobs, real lives, right? Good people. Did a maypole dance. Had a lot of fun doing that. We need more of that. We need more community. We need more people getting together and assisting each other, exchanging ideas. Even though the guy I talked to yesterday had never heard of fucking Chabad, but that's a different story. And this is it, man. This is the time, right? Like, if we're gonna do anything for David Wilcock, I'm gonna end it on this note. All right. If we're gonna do anything, if you have any feelings for David Wilcock, tragic, loved him, miss him, right? It is up to you to live the message. And the message is the Savior is within. It is not yourself, right? It is not yourself. And David was talking about Christ consciousness and the coming of the cosmic Christ, which I do believe in. It's my belief system, right? It's there for all of us. It's not just there for a select few, who believe that a country in the Middle East must exist so they can all go to the sweet tea and Lay's potato chip rapture party. And these next few years are going to test us. They're not going to be, I believe, this is my belief. My belief is, based on the astrology, it is not going to be easy. That said, there's also an acceleration happening with the astrology. And while things may not be easy, we're going to be equipped with the tools in order to meet the challenges. And at a certain point, even go beyond those challenges to, I believe, create a world that we have not seen ever, maybe since Tartaria. I mean, look what's happening now. Dan Bilzerian's going up against Randy Fine for a Congress seat in Florida. Can't wait. Right? Israel is finally being seen for what it is, which is a rogue state, and one that is basically an agency of chaos. Right? And then we're seeing all the people in the system that support that. We're seeing that. We're getting a glimpse behind the veil, people. right? The veil is opening wide. Okay, it's opening wide. More people are awake than ever before and will continue to be awake, right? And more awakening is coming. Do not waste it on false saviors. Don't waste it on false saviors. This is your awakening. This is your time. No matter who you are, no matter where you are in your life, no matter how much pain you've been through and pain you may go through, right? You are cracking this seed open because we're understanding this world in ways we've never ever understood it before. And that's that's the negative part. Wait till the positive part starts coming through, because it will come through. We're working through the fucking weeds right now. Like, we're in the weeds. There's gonna come a time where we're not going to be in the weeds anymore. And it's going to be a very, very different world. And it has nothing to do with politics at all. Nothing. I'll end this with visions. It's not like, I had something come down and I was taken out of time and space or anything. No, it was like this feeling. And I would call it, for all intents and purposes, a vision. And I was at these hot springs in outside of Clear Lake. I forget the name. They're pretty nice. I forget the name of them. And I'd gone there one day just on my own, and I was around them the whole day and in and out of the pool. And my car was parked sort of up this dirt road. It's in California. And it was not far from the main house of the hot springs. And I'd been in and out all day, and I'm walking this little dirt road, and there are these trees and shrubs and just, very luscious greenery to my left. And I just stopped for a second, and I had this overwhelming feeling about the future. And it had to do with nature in that moment. And what I got was, in the future, there will be less people in this world. That's what I felt. Less people. And I could feel into the nature. And it wasn't just that nature. It was like the nature of the future. It was always there, but something had changed. And it felt overwhelming, like teeming with knowledge and teeming with kind of this elemental energy. Like the mystery of God was swirling around this sprawling kind of greenery, right? And I'm like, okay, if this is the future, this is how we get to know God, and how God gets to know us in a different kind of way. And we are enmeshed in this mystery that is constantly unfolding and is showing us not just like, okay, well, here I'm a seed, and then I become a plant, and then I grow, and then I have a piece of fruit, and then the fruit drops, and then there's a seed in the fruit. Like, it was more than that. It was like everything was alive and animate, and it was overwhelming. And I thought to myself, holy shit, right? Could we handle this? Could we handle that kind of aliveness through everything? And it wasn't static, right? Like, that was the other part of it. It wasn't static at all. And I'm like, wow, this is powerful. I think this is where we're headed. This is where we're headed. This is when, like, the really good stuff happens, because whatever happens in the future, I feel like a lot of the cultures, I mean, you can even see it now. Like, all these things are getting played out. They're all getting played out. Like, we'll never see rock and roll again. We'll never see like really great funk music again. Like, all that shit is just going to go away, right? Great movies are going to be gone. It's all the things that we're watching now. Like, I watch Rick Beato, and he's like an archivist of the past. Or, we can celebrate it, but we'll never see that again. All these things are coming to a close. They're coming to an end. The culture that we know is going to go away. And it doesn't have to be American or Russian or Israeli or Chinese. It doesn't have to be any of that. Like, they're going to go away too. And what we're going to be left with is something profound. And that's only going to happen when this realm that we're living in goes through a deconstruction process. And that's where we are. We're at the beginning of the deconstruction's been happening, but we're at the beginning of the acceleration point. So things will get intense, right? They're already intense. They're going to get more intense, but don't worry, because we'll have other things that will come in and offset and equalize from time to time, right? And people love a challenge. They love a challenge. Epstein files get released. Somebody creates Epstein email, right? Immediately. And you could go in and type anything in there, and you would have all these different emails and pieces of information. They did that. Matter of days. Matter of days. People are committed to this. People want change, real change, not fake change, not fake hope. They want real change, and people are willing to work for it. Right? And people are fucking tired of being oppressed. I am telling you. They're tired of it. There were these guys that were two American soldiers, and they went missing in Morocco. This is recently, like the last couple of days. Like, where did they go? What were they doing there? I'll tell you what they were doing there. They were running exercises. They were in Morocco, trying to get a handle on terrain that might be very similar to Iran. That's why they were there. And what's happening in Iran is the fact that the United States does not look invincible. And these countries who have been given aid or whatever by the United States over these years, so that we could go into a place like Morocco and do some training for what the terrain might be like in Iran. The cost of doing business in these countries is going to go up. I can tell you that right now. Right? Like, the African nations, like, they're going to be like, fuck you. Fuck you. If you want to come in and do shit, right, you're going to have to pay us more. This is going to be a much more common theme moving forward. The third world they saw what happened with Venezuela. They see what might happen to Cuba. They're like, sorry, you just can't use our resources, and there'll be a price to pay. You'll either pay the price monetarily, or your motherfucking soldiers will disappear. And do we want conflicts now all over the world where we have bases and covert deals with many of these nations? Do we want all these little mini wars happening? Because now all of a sudden we're vulnerable. The world's changing, right? The world is changing. And I love America. I think Americans are great. I think they're some of the greatest people in the world. What the government has done, that's a whole other thing. And we'll save that for another night. All right. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out. Please, if you like the show, hit thumbs up. And YouTube unsubscribes people. So if you could make sure that you're subscribed, that would be helpful. And if you're here for the first time, I hope you come back and I hope you subscribe. And of course, I'm always open for doing readings, personal readings with people. And that's one of the favorite things I love to do. All right. Sorry, I sort of faded out there, didn't I? Take care. You guys have a wonderful night. And we'll see you on Tuesday for the astro weather. Bye for now.